Okay, we're starting to get the participants are starting to come on now. So we'll go ahead and get started, as I'm sure there will be more to come as they enter into the room. So let's get started, shall we? A warm welcome to everyone who's listening in today's day 2 of our webinar series on unlocking green finance towards low carbon assets. And of course, this is a day 2 of what was yesterday, the kickoff to this series. My name is Justine Lee Bell. I'm the Deputy CEO at Climate Bonds Initiative. And we're having with us today is some exceptional speakers to carry us into the next stage of discussion, which is very much around the practitioners that are in this space of securitization and aggregation of low carbon assets, and how do we unlock finance in this sector. Yesterday was a really, really fantastic session where there was a lot of discussion centered around market barriers and some of the solutions that we might be able to put forward in the market to help market growth. And so I want to share a few of those with you before we get started. And of course, just to mention some of the barriers that we may touch on today, much of this was around the lack of depth in the market. Credit information tends to be quite poor. Asset classes not really well understood by the investors, and standardization and things like frameworks and so on are still missing and definitely need to be scaled up. And of course, government action, which was some of the things that, where we get governments actually prioritizing this market and helping to support it. And the other areas of solutions to those that were discussed were things like putting in place green banks that can be dedicated green lenders, also institutional structural shift, changes in the institutional structures are required, things along the role of the development finance institutions and how they can be more acting as leveragers than lenders in the market, things like providing credit enhancement products for this market itself, market education on green and securitization, government support in the sense of preferential treatment, and trying to minimize the cost for first movers into this market. I think also there was a discussion on really targeting the low-hanging fruit, not complicating things from the onset, really making it straightforward so that that it's about learning about the model and setting up the model rather than also complicating it with the assets. R&D support and investor education were some of the other things that emerged. And so it was a very dynamic discussion, one that we did record. And so for our listeners that missed yesterday, you can go back to that recording and we'll be able to provide that link to everyone on our website. For today, also for any listeners that were with us yesterday, welcome back. For our new listeners, welcome. Just a few logistics before we dive in. We have with us a Zoom platform, so we encourage you throughout the session. We will not be calling on our audience per se, but we do have a Q&A box. So please do use that throughout the session, asking questions, and we'll make sure to bring those in. We will dedicate some time at the end, maybe 10, 15 minutes, to give our speakers a chance to answer some of those questions as we bring them through. So I'd like to now turn it over to Teresa Late. She is the UNDP Regional Technical Specialist on Climate Change Mitigation and Energy. And she's going to give us an introduction to the Climate Aggregation Platform Program that CBI and UNDP have come together on in 2015, and also give her perspectives about what she heard in yesterday's webinar. Over to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Justine. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm happy to be here on day 2. As Justine said, as UNDP, we're very happy to organize this joint UNDP-CBI climate aggregation platform virtual event, which we would have normally had in person, but I think we're doing pretty well given the circumstances. And the climate aggregation platform is a UNDP Global Environment Facility funded project with the main objective of advancing and raising awareness for innovative solutions for market barriers for financial aggregation in the small scale, low carbon energy space for developing countries. And I think, most of us who are joining via YouTube or in this session, we're here for the same reasons, in that we understand that access to clean, affordable, and reliable energy, or SDG 7, underpins the achievement of nearly every one of the other SDGs. But still today, as we know, there's an estimated 789 million people that don't have access to affordable and reliable energy sources, including 4 times that number of people without access to clean cooking solutions. And from recent studies, we know that to get to the realization of SDG 7, we're going to need approximately 445 billion USD a year in the next 10 years up to 2030. And as discussed yesterday and through Justine's presentation on sort of the state of the market, that financing gap might seem large or small to you depending on your perspective. If you compare it to the global bond market, which has reached over 128 trillion USD in 2020 alone, that number seems small. But from my perspective, even though we're making a lot of advances with climate finance and there's more attention given to it today than any other time, many of us working in this sector and the energy access sector in developing countries know that it's not always about the amount of money required and the amount of money available. In developing countries with challenging financial markets, what can be the difference between getting capital for energy access where it's needed or not is how you structure it. And that's where we really need to push the needle. We need to be more innovative and we need to support taking risks. And yesterday, we had a great opportunity to speak with several energy and climate finance experts about the role of securitization as an opportunity for energy access investments in markets such as Nigeria, India. But still, there are very few transactions happening to securitize distributed renewable energy projects. And as Justine just mentioned, some of those are the small scale of total aggregated assets, standardization issues, limited understanding of credit risk, and regulatory frameworks, because this is quite new. This is quite new for the financial sector, coupled with technologies that are very new and misunderstood at time. And Justine, to reiterate some of the points that you raised, I had the same takeaways actually. Many of the challenges are institutional. And I did like the suggestions of green banks, which we're seeing arise in many markets. But what exactly will they do? What will they focus on? What is the knowledge gap from business as usual with banks and what a green bank would do? Credit enhancement products were mentioned, and I specifically like that one panelist brought to our attention that DFIs have credit guarantees, but none are focused towards portfolio lending for financial aggregation transactions. So that's a really great opportunity for many of us. And yeah, we do need to support the information infrastructure, profiling more cases of these transactions. How do they happen? How we need to train up teams who are originating these transactions, and to understand the unique business models and investability of these enterprises who have been emerging in the distributed renewable energy space in developing markets. That, from my experience, is one of the largest challenges, is that these businesses have to tackle so many challenges, but they're not always understood. So matching a new financial instrument with them is another issue. And from on the ground experience, another issue that comes up is data availability to do the aggregation, and the sophistication of data and data management that will be needed. And I just want to say, as many of us here, we play a role in the sector as ecosystem enablers. We need to ensure that investors can realize these transactions for enterprises on the ground who we know they face huge market challenges when getting finance from typical commercial markets. And so that's where the design of the climate aggregation platform comes in, and why UNDP, the Jeff and CBI came together to address these bottlenecks via promoting dialogue both at the global level, such as platforms like this, and at the national level, where we hope to pilot some activities in East Africa in the coming year. And we hope to advance new market solutions to support the promotion of financial aggregation for small-scale renewable low-carbon energy. And so while yesterday's webinar really looked at the state of the market, the ecosystem, and some challenges, today we're going to build off of that, and I'm excited to hear some examples of transactions where they really get stuck, and where we can improve and provide technical support to ensure that this market is moving along. So on behalf of UNDP, CBI, and the CAP, I do thank you for participating in this webinar, and I hope this is the first of many engagements that we'll have on this topic. And with that, I'd like to hand over to the moderator of our panel, Namita Vikas from Octus ESG. Thank you.
Over to you, Namita.
Thank you very much, Justin and Teresa. Thanks a lot, and welcome everybody to this very interesting session where we're going to hear from practitioners on how they made it possible, what worked, and what are the lessons that were learned. And I know that, as an investor or as a banker, how complex this whole market is. So, if I may just put a little bit of context here, a World Investment Report of 2014 of the UNCTAD had estimated at that time that $5 to $7 trillion per annum would be needed globally to fund the SDGs, with developing countries seeing an annual funding gap of about 2.5 trillion USD. But its 2020 report says that the funds investing in sustainable development were only about $1.2 trillion as of now, and with most of these concentrated in developed countries. So climate finance flows to developing countries remain short of over 100 billion per annum from the target that we set at Paris 5 years back. In such a scenario, developing economies absolutely need to urgently scale up mechanisms to attract funding towards zero carbon assets. We have been seeing some traction in countries like India, Philippines, and others. Adding to this, the rapid traction in the energy demand across developing markets, the EIA has indicated that substantial percentage of the 56% of estimated growth in the global energy demand from 2010 to 2040 would occur in developing markets. So for those who still lack access to electricity in such markets, low carbon solutions, small scale, low carbon solutions would hold critical importance. Well, there are some specific challenges in financing small scale carbon assets. I have faced these when I was a part of a large private sector bank in India. So for example, in case of energy solutions in India, the last mile delivery stands out as geographic areas are either underserved or beyond the reach of the grid. Communities with low income, high vulnerability, scarcity of resources, including low levels of energy consumption at the same time. But more importantly, at a local level, these challenges include the perceived risk of lending to poorer communities, the mismatch in expectations about acceptable and realistic returns on investments, the lack of or limited understanding among financiers and investors about local communities, appropriately structuring the entire finance mix, and risk mitigation. These play really a large role in not being able to meet the requisite demand. And beyond these factors, of course, there are high transaction costs in financing. I'm sure we spoke about that yesterday. Smaller volumes, over dependence on banks with short maturities, which dissuade investors from reaching these markets. So frankly, the landscape is pretty complex, as investing in these assets also require a kind of an integrated approach where multiple stakeholders, right from end energy users to energy providers, providers to the whole ecosystem developers, including technology, system innovators, financiers, local governments, all need to come together. And then each one has their own priorities, from ongoing payments for energy systems to capital for diversification of products to policy regulatory arrangements, etc. So while the space looks very, very complex, stands a big opportunity, and financing needs require a kind of a variety of instruments beyond traditional options of debt, equity, or grants. And we've seen different kinds of mix that have evolved from an alternative financing instrument standpoint. So revolving funds, which are an infusion of grants where they're addressing the small and the large credit needs for energy end users. These are particularly relevant in communities or contexts that have limited access to formal financial institutions. We've seen a lot of that in developing economies, to concessional debt and guarantees, which serve as backups or risk mitigants for investors, to subsidies. I mean, subsidies, as long as they do not crowd out private investments, I think they are good. But I think what has finally emerged as a good option is aggregation platforms that pool investor money and blend public and private financing, which has shown the potential to channel larger volumes of funding into enterprises and end users that have smaller financing needs. So not only these have enabled reduction in risk by spreading investments across projects and portfolios, but pooling together smaller loans and assets of small scale projects, thus creating an opportunity for larger investment products that meet the needs of organizations seeking bigger investments. And as we've seen, financial aggregation and securitization of small sized green assets becoming relevant. So green securitization, as Justin mentioned, standardization and bundling have bolstered finance towards such projects, with asset backed securities helping the access of bond markets for longer tenors, lower cost of funding in some markets maybe. And while securitization is common in mortgages, within the green finance space, it has helped mobilize institutional capital for smaller projects. And we've seen, yesterday also it was discussed that the advantages are multifold. Aggregation of small assets that are not large enough for standalone funding have seen to have attained scale, which has given access to institutional investors, reduction in cost of finance, including upfront costs, which is very important. Green ABS have seen to have reduced the dependence on short tenor bank credit, as it has enabled access capital markets for longer tenor fixed income finance, thus matching long-term development projects with institutional investors with long dated kind of liabilities. So I think all this has seen a good traction, and we've seen in developed countries, I mean, US market has seen a surge of solar ABS, with Solar City having issued the world's first solar ABS based on PPAs from the rooftop solar projects of 5,000 households. But we know that it's very complex. Aggregation becomes very, very difficult, especially constraints in the developing countries is, the lack of ample deserving assets, non-standardized documentation, and uncertainties over feed-in tariffs. There are constraints of historical data on energy performance for that matter. However, there have been some success stories, and we have a good amount of examples from today's speakers of how they have done maybe aggregation of deserving projects, ensuring investors have the comfort with green credentials, or have taken traction on financing microgrids for that matter in the African markets, so on and so forth. So what we're going to do today is that while developing markets have seen these successes, we are going to hear from our speakers, Sun Funders, Albion, Rockefeller, and DLM, who would talk to us about how they have curated the market and addressed barriers beyond financing in general and considered scaling of such projects. So ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today a good lineup of speakers. Tinashe Makoni, who is the Chief Legal Officer of Sunfunder. He comes with over 12 years of experience advising developers, international banks, development financial institutions, private equity funds, and state-owned enterprises in complex cross-border transactions. Tinashe is at the helm of structuring regulatory and governance matters driving Sunfunder's investments of over 139 million US dollars in debt financing while pioneering solar companies collaborating with major debt fund investors and directly impacting more than 7 million people with improved access to clean energy across Africa. Then we have Polo Todaro, who is the founding partner and CEO of Albion Capital, an asset management firm in Rio de Janeiro. Polo comes with over 26 years of experience in structured finance and private equity and has been recognized internationally for his innovative approach to sustainable project finance using securitization. Then we have with us Caroline Ibombu, who is the Director of Power and Climate at Rockefeller Foundation, who has been focusing on driving large-scale impact through the foundation's power investments in Africa, as well as mobilizing significant financing for extending electricity access globally. She particularly has worked on innovative microgrid financing and advancing more effective integrated electrification planning and investments across key markets. Sony Aire, the Group CEO of DLM Capital, a full-service investment bank with focus on creating long-term financing solutions to key sectors across the Nigerian economy. He has worked with IFC, HSBC, NatWest, and others. And at IFC particularly, he was working on structured finance for the Sub-Saharan Africa and undertook securitization transactions in addition to creating instruments that support value in the debt capital market. So great. Welcome everybody. And I would like to throw my first question at Tinashe at Sunfunder. So Tinashe, Sunfunder has been operating in a sector that faces challenges, especially in tough markets like Africa, mainly from risks of payment security, fluctuating costs of technology, short-term project execution, regulatory challenges and changes. So how have you been able to overcome these? And can you share some of your best risk mitigation methods for others to replicate and follow that have enabled low risks and high returns?
Thanks, Namita. And thank you everybody for joining. I think the starting point for us at Sunfunder has been key strategic partnerships with financial institutions and family and philanthropic foundations and other pools of capital. We take a blended finance approach, and I need to give a shout out to the Rockefeller Foundation team. They were instrumental in helping Sunfunder get off the ground. They took a subordinated capital position in one of our earlier funds, which unlocked capital and allowed other people who had a lower risk appetite to the Rockefeller Foundation to come in and have that loss absorbent buffer of capital. We have similar relationships, but I do need to give a shout out to Rockefeller for that. Another key relationship we have, sort of on that same theme, has been with DFC, formerly OPIC. They are a anchor investor in a number of our funds that we've set up, and one of the things they've helped us with is a very innovative political risk insurance product. It's without giving too much of a secret sauce, it goes further than your typical PRI instrument, covering currency, political violence, availability, and so on. It's a much more comprehensive product than one would typically find in the market. And by having this bespoke approach to structuring a political risk insurance product that works for us in the sector that we're in, they've enabled us to push the boat out and do riskier transactions. This year we closed our very first transaction in the Central African Republic, which is a very challenging jurisdiction, but but for partnerships such as that, it would have been really difficult for us to do that. Another really key risk is currency, right? When you speak to anybody who lends in emerging markets, they do talk about currency. A lot of our customers or our borrowers will need FX, foreign currency, hard currency, to purchase the components that they need. The solar panels, the inverters, and so on. That batteries and so on that they actually need to sell or as part of their business. But they earn their revenue in local currency, right? So the issues you have are things such as, well, you've got volatility, but also availability as well. One solution that we've come up with great assistance from MFX is a synthetic hedge instrument. So we are able to access better terms, cheaper, with less collateral or no collateral posted, and also access to different baskets of FX hedging that many corporates, and certainly not any retail customers, but even many corporates in African jurisdictions just don't have access to. So by us taking on a hedge on preferential terms, again via some of these strategic relationships, we're able to synthetically hedge our loan. So we pass on the benefit of the hedge to our borrowers in these jurisdictions. So that's been a really really important instrument that alongside MFX we've been able to provide for our customers. And Namita, I'm happy to go into any more of the detail here without breaching confidences or giving away our secret sauce.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think you've made a very good point on, how partnerships and collaborations have indeed helped. And, I agree that the currency is a big risk when it comes to developing markets, and how you've hedged it is very, very important. I think these are very important points that you've made here. And may I now move on to Polo. So Polo Albion Capital has been developing structured investment products to finance companies and projects in sustainable infrastructure space. While substantial amount of dedicated green capital globally contributes to a large portion of green bonds, how do you see green asset-backed securitization taking a larger share of this pie?
Thank you, Peter. As I would like to underline the importance of securitization and what we do and the way we see this as part of the solution in increasing the available financing for climate-related investments. And of course, securitization did a lot to real estate market. Its ability to bundle, to aggregate smaller projects, to de-risk smaller projects, to scale up and to package into instruments which are familiar to investors. All of this help to contribute in this challenge. But what we see as main obstacles in the green ABS and the green securitization is, from our perspective here in the Brazilian context, is first the limited offer. So there's apparent lack of green ABS and green MBS being offered in local markets or being issued in the local market. So we will bring to the market next month what we believe that would be the first issues of green ABS and green MBS, both designed to finance community solar projects, and 46 megawatts in total for the first stage. So I think that there's a lack of offers, so that leads to a certain degree of inexperience in Brazilian capital markets. So they still need to get more knowledge and more experience with green securities in general, particularly those arising from complex securitization transactions. So we see that there's still a limited pool of capital to be tapped in highly sophisticated hedge funds and high yield funds, but mainstream investors, including institutional investors, where is the bulk of money, they will eventually follow, but this is indeed an obstacle to see an increase in the allocation of capital into these instruments. On the investors' end, our perception here is that most private investors here, they do see green securities as a nice to have, and not a critical piece of the investment decision, neither in terms of risk management nor in terms of moral compass. And concerns about the need for longer maturities in such projects and the FX risk noted before, they do limit the interest from international investors. The third obstacle that we see is the sponsors' resistance. So the entities being financed, the project developers, they have a limited interest in green ABS and green MBS as an instrument for their capital raising process, because they have a perception that the trade-off is not good enough. So their commitment to green security, they believe that's not being met by a lower cost of capital, which we would say that this is a mistake. So the way we're dealing here with these challenges is, first thing is we have been asset managers of these receivable funds, the green FDIC concept, and so we take responsibility for the issues, for issuing securities quotas that are that qualify as green ABS. Occasionally, we might act, and we are doing this as structures, financial advisors in one green MBS, and so that was a restriction for ourselves. We wouldn't touch it if we weren't to structure a green MBS. But at the same time, I think that one of the ways to overcome such challenges is to use familiar instruments, familiar to the investor. So making it easier for the investor to understand what's going on and to feel more secure about doing such investment. So that's what we did, and this is a very successful experience on our end by doing the green FDIC. The FDIC is a very well-known instrument in Brazil. It's a receivables fund, but heavily regulated and well-known for 15 years. So packaging that into something which is familiar to the investor is a way to overcome the problem as well. In doing so, we are addressing these new issues to local markets, so we are able to sideline the FX factor. So we don't have to deal with these type of intolerance to FX risks. So I think that this is more or less what we've seen in terms of barriers and how we deal with those barriers more or less successfully.
Great, thank you so much. I think you have hit on the right nerve of curating the market, where it's very important to look at how do you get the investors to understand the whole space, because I think the perception of going into aggregation itself is a big hindrance of going into aggregation or securitization for that matter. Great, thank you so much for that response. And I will move on to Caroline now with my next question on Rockefeller's way of working with the microgrids financing. So financing microgrids in developing markets, Caroline, is very, very difficult. I know that you do some of that in India too. It's very challenging given that the lack of regulations to protect microgrid asset cash flows, customers' ability to pay, the capital flows favoring larger deals, as also Paul said. So how has Rockefeller been able to overcome these challenges and ensured sustainability of the model in a tough market, across the markets that you guys operate, which are all tough, particularly in Africa? So over to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Namita. And thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure taking part of this panel. Indeed, there's now consensus that the mini-grid sector, along with off-grid solar, will be essential to achieving Sustainable Development Goal 7 by 2030 in a cost-effective manner. But despite this consensus, we also know that the mini-grid market is still facing some considerable challenges, such as the one you've mentioned. And those challenges must be overcome to allow the sector to reach scale. For instance, let's take one of the concerns you've mentioned with regards to customer ability to pay. We know that mini-grid operators sell electricity to customers that often have little income and limited ability to pay. Power demand from these customers can be limited and unpredictable, as many of those customers rely on agriculture for income. Yet, varying weather conditions, seasonality, and others directly impact the ability of these customers to pay their bills. So such irregular income streams pose significant risk to revenue collection. Well, one way to counter this issue is to involve productive use energy. So productive use customers in solar hybrid mini-grid projects is something that we've been focusing on quite a lot as a foundation. Indeed, mini-grid developers are increasingly looking as well as at sites where productive uses customers are present. By doing so, they can innovate their business model to stimulate those customers to stimulate those customers and help them use more electricity. And that's something we've been supporting, and we've built quite some knowledge and expertise around. We have financed, for instance, an innovation lab in Africa that is focused on helping develop those, as I said, innovative business models all around demand stimulation. So what has that meant concretely in terms of numbers, in terms of lives impacted? Well, since the beginning of our Smart Power initiative, our investments have actually impacted the lives of over 500,000 people in India, Myanmar, but also in Sub-Saharan Africa. We are really focused on investing in our resources in research, innovative projects that really expand the thinking beyond the traditional focus on energy supply as the key to achieve universal electrification. As a result, it really has emerged that a critical and often overlooked solution to electrification actually resides in this productive uses of energy that I've mentioned, and the need to stimulate and drive productive energy uses. It's a very central focus of our initiative, and we really try to identify those scalable interventions that boost demand for electricity and create economic opportunities for the unelectrified. But that's just one of the levers. Boosting demand is just one of the levers. There are several initiatives that we partake on. Since time is limited, maybe allow me to give one example. It's the Tata Power joint venture we've recently launched. Tata Power, with whom we have partnered to create TP Renewable Microgrid in India, is a major deal that is expected to actually unlock 1 billion in financing through 2026 to build 10,000 mini-grids. That's indeed quite major. For these 10,000 renewable energy mini-grids, we aim at providing energy to 5 million households, create 10,000 new jobs, and so much more. We actually think that this project will be able to improve access to reliable power for more than 25 million people across the communities that are targeted. It's really groundbreaking, and this is the type of initiative we think are necessary to reach scale. With such groundbreaking collaboration, we're using our catalytic capital from the foundation, but also our technical support for Smart Power India initiative to mobilize a major private sector actor into the impact space. Our partnership combines the strong commercial discipline needed to ensure scale and sustainability with the knowledge and expertise that will ensure benefits to reach the left behind communities. Obviously, one will say, okay, that's Tata Power. That's a major engine in India. The one could argue that there might not be a similar equivalent on the African context. Well, while there might not be a Tata Power in Africa, there are several very committed and strong private sector actors on the African continent in those different African markets with whom we think maybe not exactly similar initiative can be driven, but with whom we can also create some very key defining partnership to drive at such results. Those kind of collaborations are the kind of collaboration we're working into the sector. So not only financing mini-grid developers, working with major private sector actors, but also quickly, and I'm already over my 5 minutes, but maybe one last example would be one of the funds that we financed through Cross-Boundary Energy Access Fund. This is a very interesting effort to help unlock scale on the African continent. It's all about providing financing to mini-grid developers, but through an innovative finance structure, kind of alike to the project finance that we usually see for major large-scale utility project. Because yes, we really believe that mini-grids also should benefit from the type of long-term more patient capital that larger utility scale project benefit from project finance type of structuring. So with Cross-Boundary Energy Access, we've been developing this very interesting fund, but I'm now realizing I'm over 6 minutes, so let me not monopolize the time, and I'll be happy to provide more examples on that later on during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I think you have hit some very important points here. Guaranteed load is extremely important, and we've been in this. I mean, I have experienced this space over the last 8-10 years, and that was one of the biggest challenges of why these projects weren't successful. And partnerships with somebody like a large power company would certainly bring in the volume, and we know that Tata Power in a way is using their non-green kind of asset financing to be able to plow it into this. So they're also doing some good green work. So that's great. Thanks a lot. And let me move on to Sonny, who is from DLM. Sonny, I earlier introduced you. So what I want to ask you is that, securitization safeguards the investments and links defaults entirely with the performance of the receivables. And this is also a follow through from my earlier question. So how has DLM used this financing practice in case of small scale, low carbon assets to mitigate investor risk and credit enhancements?
So thank you very much. As you know, there's not much, let me call it green financing that's occurring in our space at this point in time. Securitization is always about the underlying asset and being able to securitize what comes from it. So in terms of green assets, if memory serves me right, Nigeria's only done one so far, a green bond, which is just a plain vanilla government, a government issued bond, if so to speak. We obviously, as investment banks or intermediaries within the system, begin to work with, potential issuers in terms of looking for projects that would actually suit, this sort of asset class. And again, as you know, with securitization, you always need to have at least a level of seasoning in terms of the asset itself to make sure that it works. So at this point in time, it's really more at the sort of fishing stage and more the exploratory stage, as opposed to having anything specific that's being done. Now, of course, to the extent that an asset class does come available, then yes, we would obviously be the first to jump on it and try and make sure that we're meeting our own quota of of green or blue type bonds around the planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sonny. Yes, you have. You're right that there's not much traction that is happening. However, given the volume that is out there, I think a lot of innovation is required, and a lot of different way of even how DFIs or other multilaterals look at providing some kind of credit enhancements to be able to give the comfort to do these kind of projects. So great, thanks a lot. And then moving on back to Tinashe. My question to you is that, the lack of commercially scalable financing is often seen due to very high dependence on a single entrepreneur, limited capital, and instability in the overall cash flows. So how has Sunfunder used financial structuring to its advantage? And can you share maybe an example that will bring out not just the structuring, but how have you been able to achieve volume and impact on ground?
Sure, Namita. I can actually talk about a transaction which we're working on now, and I'll have to withhold the name, unfortunately. But there's a company in active, mostly in Africa, that's a solar pump distributor. So they acquire, solar pumps, along with sort of, all the equipment, the kit, panels, batteries, inverters, and pipes and the like, offshore, and they then sell them on credit terms to to farmers, a mixture of a retail, so your normal sort of rural farmers, as well as sort of larger commercial farmers, and they had a fairly complex financial sort of structure, right? So they had a mix of, they had some commercial lenders, they had short-term overdrafts, they had some grant funding and concessional funding from DFIs, they had longer-term facilities, and they were looking to scale up to, I guess, be a little bit more efficient in their capital raising, and also sort of access a wider pool of lenders. So we sat down with them and we looked at different structures, and in the end we settled on a borrowing base facility where we brought 4 other lenders who are a mix of DFIs. We have also been speaking to a crowdfunding platform, so that's an interesting sort of angle as well as some sort of more commercial lenders. We came up with a structure where we pooled the collateral, we linked the amount that will be lent to the fluctuating value of the receivable. So so there's the asset-backed nature of it. I know it's not a securitization in the sense of there's no formal legal transfer of the underlying pool of receivables to an SPV or something, but we try to incorporate at least some of those structures in there. And I think the important thing is we did a couple of things. We're able to share information. We're able to bring in a diverse group of funders. We're able to sort of leverage the collective knowledge base and data that we'd all collected together in our various interactions with the client, and we sort of lowered the pain of fundraising in the future. And I think they're also well placed in the future to look for off-takes and other more sort of interesting and innovative structures. And the hope is to be able to sort of partner with them and to come up with something which is appropriately sort of not complexity, not seeking complexity for the sake of it, but to the extent that it actually unlocks other pools of capital, we can come up with even more innovative solutions. So that's one we're working on at the moment. We're really excited. I mean, the impact will be significant. They do wonderful work among some of the poorest of the poor, and also enable entrepreneurs, right? Enable job creation and enables people who would otherwise be unable to pay the hundreds or thousands of dollars to buy a solar pump, and the underlying sort of infrastructure sort of that goes with it, by making the sums manageable, right? So we can sort of be the ones that sort of bank the receivables, but also enable the company to go and buy more inventory. So that's a transaction we are hoping to close at the end of this year and be able to sort of announce in public what it is.
Great, thanks. All the best to you for closing on such an interesting product.
Well, Namita, we've not yet closed, so don't.
All the best to be so that you close the product.
Thank you.
That reminds me, Tinashe, of a very interesting product that I had done about 3 years back, and it was more of blended finance, where you see in the deserts of India there are 48,000 women making salt using diesel pumps. So we took a cohort of 600 women and moved them to solar pumps on the back of a guarantee that we did through a a back of financing for those women we did through a local bank on the back of a guarantee that we provided. We did an interest subvention and a grant. So a very nice blending where their incomes went up almost 3 times from what the levels were. And of course, given the aggregated nature of Indian economy or maybe other economies, these models are so replicable if just done right the first time. So I think it's very interesting, and all the best to you.
Completely. And
For
Namita, as you say, if the beauty of the guarantee right is that the bank, they're not actually advancing the capital. They're crowding in capital by lowering the risk. So that's, yeah. So structures like that are bread and butter, and yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Uh, Great. Polo, to you, while tapping investment opportunities in emerging markets and using securitization to, generate superior risk return profiles, how have innovative and complex ventures panned out, and what has enabled these innovations to deliver premium to the investors? So, do you have proven examples of bundling and blended finance again that may have delivered better returns?
Oh, yes, and thank you for the question. That helps me to answer one of the questions posed in the Q&A chat by Sophie Smith. So, telling a bit about the story. Well, first, in terms of innovation, let me first address through that angle. We developed a mechanism at Alban Capital called the Green Fatigue. So, this was developed as a concept a couple of years ago, and from that point on, we've been working first on fine-tuning the securitization model that was designed to allow project financing to happen in Brazil without the need of development concessional public capital. So the instrument was designed to not to be a blended finance instrument, although it can be used successfully, I guess. But we designed it not to need public or concessional capital at all. We will bring to the market the first green FDIC, the first issue next month. So we are in quiet period. So I can give you details about that, but I can tell you that it is a well-known vehicle, the instrument, the FDIC, designed to finance community solar plants around 35 megawatts in these first issue, and simultaneously we are launching MBS, a green MBS that it's basically reproduces the same type of structure, the same securitization mechanism, but through an MBS instrument. So we are basically testing with the second one, testing a different package that would address a different audience in terms of local investors that do demand that particular package. So in both cases, what we're doing is an aggregation of several smaller projects. So in these 35 megawatts, we have planned the 46 megawatts in total. We have projects with 1 megawatt, 2.5. So we are aggregating all of them, and the Green FDIC, this receivables fund, is designed to finance up to 350 megawatts in the next 2 years, but it can go higher than this. The way we work to deliver the premium returns you're asking is basically something that we care a lot about. We don't think that we should take unnecessary risks. We think that we should trade complexity for higher returns. So we do things that are very complex in exchange for higher returns. So that limits a lot of the pool of investors we can talk to. So have to be more sophisticated investors that have a team to do the analysis of that, a lot of documents. Well, guys, you know the drill. So in exchange for that lot of work in terms of structuring issues and the time investors consume in analyzing that issues, we do demand higher returns. So in the project developers on the other end, they are willing to share more of their return in order to make these deals work for the investors. So, in what we do in terms of the complexity of these funds is to address several different challenges that we do have: de-risking, bundling different projects, making it in a way that the governance of that fund allows it to scale up over time. Not the case of these investment products, but blending in concessional money if needed in future replications of the same model. So the complexity in the structure of these deals has been leading us to a situation where project developers are willing to share more of their return, so investors at the end get a better return. So this makes the deals doable. That attracts local investors to come along. So this is the principle behind the idea. And so these green certificates, as I said, we are in quite a period, but it will deliver attractive returns, not demanding any concessional capital at all to make it work. So we address entirely sophisticated hedge funds and high yield funds locally in Brazil. So we're not getting into trouble to deal with FX hedging. And all of this, bundling, de-risking, scaling up has been achieved entirely using the securitization techniques instead of using the protective action of concessional capital taking first loss, for example.
Great. Complex structures for high returns. I guess it's worth the effort that we need to put in. So my next question is for Caroline. So Caroline, access to affordable financing is one of the significant barriers to the overall development of mini grids. And this is pretty much linked to different tiers of financing. So what have been some of the lessons learned by Rockefeller in using financing instruments that have been successful? And have you replicated these, like one learning from one market, used it in another market? So how have you been able to take advantage that you operate in multiple markets and the replicability?
Thank you, Namita. Yes, well, indeed, the foundation has several tools that it uses to support the sector, from grants to what we call PRI, project-related investments. We have several, as I said, tools that we use to support local developers, local entrepreneurs, as well as international companies. The type of support we offer, I take this opportunity of also mentioning this information to answer one of the questions on the chat. The type of opportunities we offer do not focus on multinational companies. The Tata example given earlier was one example of different ways of getting to scale, because indeed getting to scale will need, as we say, innovative partnerships, innovative thinkings, and creative models. So it's actually very important to indeed also use major private sector actors to help them get into a sector that does need to reach to scale to be sustainable. That being said, our investments vary from very small startup to, as I said, larger companies. My colleague Tinashe from Santander earlier mentioned, for instance, how critical the investment from the foundation was when they were just starting the fund and needed to have that patient capital available. That's just one of the many examples. We also invest in local developers. For instance, in Nigeria, we have a specific program whereby we support local entrepreneurs, helping them really ensure that they do have a chance, leveling the playing field, making sure that when it comes to the sector, they have enough opportunities to access financing from larger DFIs and so on, which require quite a specific preparation, as we all know. So this is just to give you an example of the different type of support we provide. Now, based on these different initiatives and different investments we've made in those various actors, what are some of the lessons we've learned? One of them, I think we've already alluded to it in previous questions, is the fact that developers, and often mostly local developers, remain quite small and undercapitalized. They lack the balance sheet to support large-scale project development, with a few exceptions in some countries, for instance, in Nigeria. However, overall, that is one learnings that we have noticed. Well, And this lack of capital that matches what the private developer needs is something that we're really trying to address. We really do need to address distinct capital needs of developers in emerging markets. So for instance, local currency needs, bank guarantees, and so on, as also was alluded earlier by one of the speakers here as well. Another lessons learned, another takeaways, if I may say, from the sector is the fact that donor or government subsidy programs have actually failed to materialize at scale or under a reasonable timeline to support the project viability. And yet we know that the mini-grid sector or mini-grid market is yet to achieve the tipping point at which it can expand without subsidies. So this is also something that we are trying to do. We're really trying to develop and invest in targeted, result-based subsidies that will optimize public sector financing and drive integrated electrification models to support decentralized renewable energy models. Another thing that we are trying to do is, based on one of the other takeaways we've seen, that takeaway is the fact that international utilities are now finally beginning to really explore mini-grid opportunities. For the longest time, there was too much of a dichotomy between on-grid and off-grid. However, we see that this is changing, either through investment into developers or through smaller scale project development that they do internally. The utilities are now starting to explore mini-grid opportunities. And we think that's essential to really build these partnerships. These partnerships are key to getting to universal access. We have a unique opportunity to combine the strength of the grid and off-grid distribution solutions via what we call integrated electrification strategies. And that will really help serve a huge unaddressed market. That's something we're really focusing on. We think that combining off-grid and grid solutions will really be key to helping achieve universal electricity access. So we really need to do away, with this. We'll actually need to arrive at a paradigm shift where utilities and off-grid companies work collaboratively with the joint goal of really ending energy poverty. So we've been working a lot on what we call the utility of the future, finding innovative models that really bring mini-grids developer with utilities and helping them put together the best offer to reach the unaddressed market. Then finally, when it comes to another lesson learned, I think we cannot mention the lesson learned of the sector without mentioning political risk. Definitely, we see it in so many countries when it comes to regulation and the way it's negatively, if not properly handled, it can negatively impact the mini-grid viability. So it's also something that we are definitely taking away and that we see across different markets, the importance of regulation. Thank you.
You've said it very right, and we've seen how political risks or the regulatory uncertainties, like negotiating of PPAs in case of large-scale utilities have really impacted the market. But very true that these are the risks that need to be factored in. Thank you. So moving on to Sonny. Sonny, my question to you is, from your larger experience of doing green asset financing, for example, Toyota has been using existing car leases to finance EVs, which is really a case of using brown assets to free up the capital for green assets. So how do you think from a small scale, low carbon solution standpoint, what is your point of view and what experiences that you have gone through to better use brown to fund green? So what sectors, what products, what markets? Can you please elaborate?
Yeah. Okay, so I could give you two examples of that. But obviously, so the first one is where we did a securitization of bus ticket receivables, and where the proceeds of that future flow securitization was used by the company to obviously expand its business. Now, one of the good things that could be, and that's something I would be discussing with the management of the company, is that for the next, for instance, transaction, one of the things we could do is look at using a portion of the next series, to finance, say, for instance, e-vehicles or, other green type mobility vehicles. The other example I can give is where we securitized, we did a lease It was actually, offshore. You normally hear of auto leases, which are car leases. Here, there were more bike leases. As you know, in parts of Africa, actually most parts, a lot of people travel also, using bike mobility. So one of our clients, was able to, raise monies by securitizing the leases. In other words, when what they do is they buy the bikes, okay, and then the riders will come in, would then effectively purchase those bikes from Max under some lease agreement, under which a certain level of cash flow is paid on a daily basis until the bike has then been paid in full. So that cash flow there was securitized. Again, what I would like to see is where a portion of the next series of that is also used towards, green vehicles, and then thereby, having that example of brown to green, and that would be fantastic. And I think, the only thing that I can see having an issue, I wouldn't say an impact, but something we need to think through, obviously, is the infrastructure to ensure that those kind of green vehicles can actually operate successfully and economically viable, in an environment of this nature. That's one of the things we have to look at. But, is it possible? Absolutely, yes. And that's what I'll say. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Yeah. These are very replicable models from one industry to another. Bikes used for EV, I think is a very interesting way to look at how from brown to green can take place. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to Tinashe. Tinashe, tell us from an aggregation and securitization point of view, what are the most effective yet cost-effective methods, particularly for emerging markets, that you think can be applied? And what are also the issues that developing countries need to be very mindful of when approaching investors that focus on climate, so that lower cost of finance is realized? We've seen that mostly green is concentrated towards large-scale utility renewable energy. So how do you think we can bring this to small scale? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Namita. We're actually working in the solar home system space with some companies where we are looking to securitize the income stream from the pay-go receivables. So these companies will purchase these small solar home systems for a couple of $100. They will sell them for 18 months, 2-3 years to consumers, and it'll be an income stream over the next, say, 3 years, and being able to package that into a vehicle that then issues notes, to institutional investors and the like to invest in that structure. Now, so we actually sort of looking at that, and there's a number of challenges. One is and Sonia, I know you've it seems, and I think Nigeria is doing really well, but certainly in East Africa, where Sun Fund is mostly active, the institutional investor base is still growing. So the challenge we have initially is actually the depth of the capital markets in the African region, right? The absence of a secondary market, right? If you've got a bond, where you're actually going to sell that bond and how do you get an exit? And also the regulatory environment that limits the universe of securities that long-term insurers and pension funds can invest in. I think that's a real challenge that holds the sector back. South Africa, for example, is done really well in the renewable space with the liberalization of their sort of their prudential and regulatory regime. But I do want to sort of draw some inspiration from a company called InfraCredit, and Sonia, I'm sure, is well aware, and other people here have come across them, which we think is a fantastic innovation, where effectively there's a partnership between the private sector, the public sector in Nigeria, and multilaterals like Pidge, Gar & Co. and the structure they've sort of developed is a structure, and all of this is public, it's on the website, a structure whereby companies can issue a bond, and institutional investors, long-term insurers, pension funds will enjoy a measure of protection. So that wrap, it's almost like the old monoline structure in Europe. That bond is protected by a guarantee of some sort issued by a AAA rated financial institution. So that brings the borrowing costs right down, and it also sort of allows institutional investors who would otherwise not be able to invest in a sub sort of investment grade security. It allows them to actually unleash capital in that sector. We are hoping to be able to sort of replicate some of the learnings from that and find ways to draw in sort of those pools of institutional investors. And it's growing, right? As savers and insurers and pension funds grow on the continent, we want to find a way for them to actually, rather than relying on funds from Europe and the US and so on, which is welcome and great, but see how we can channel those funds in ways that enables actually local savers to be the ones that are actually investing in products. I mean, how wonderful would it be if my grandmother in Zimbabwe's pension fund is actually funding a pool of solar home receivables or mini grids and so on. So that's something we're hoping to achieve, or to sort of play a role in sort of in developing and growing in East Africa and Southern Africa in the coming years.
Absolutely. I think, the way these kind of models have delivered on access and cost of finance, I think very important is pay as you go. Having picked up popularity, one very important thing that it's addressing is also the affordability, especially of lower disposable income populations. So that's a very important point here. Thank you. So moving on to Paulo. Paulo, my question is again going back to innovative mechanisms like peer-to-peer and ground lease models have been seen mostly in advanced markets, and developing markets are still far away from these kind of innovations, given the intrinsic systemic challenges that they face. So what, from your perspective, are some of the immediate actions that are needed in emerging markets, developing markets, to fast track such innovative solutions so that the market can really go to scale?
Sorry. Well, that's an interesting question. In a certain sense, we're dealing right now with the type of ground lease as part of this first one we're doing. Because the community solar plants is obviously developed a rented property, and the energy generation assets are rented to comparative, so diversified small scale consumers. But generally speaking, I don't see barriers to develop different types of innovative underlying contracts, allowing securitization to work properly, not in our context here. I believe that the legal framework we're dealing here is quite solid and flexible, and so that's been what I can tell is our regional experience here, is that we've been seeing proper conditions, I'd say, to access private capital markets for green project financing, and that's basically, I don't want to sound simplistic here, but basically, if we are able to turn illiquid future cash flows into reasonably liquid, low risk pools by using managing collateral, subordination, excess spread, insurance contracts, whatever, and if we turn the disaggregation into an advantage by using the advantage of diversification, what I see is that it is something that we can address the needs of the capital markets as we see here. In terms of systemic challenge, this is quite tricky. In our experience here in Brazil, what the biggest villain ever against any type of financial innovation in capital markets was always an environment of extremely high interest rates. So now living at a 2% nominal rate, so virtually negative real interest rates, capital markets, and particularly conservative investment funds, institutional investors, they must do the job of finding other opportunities other than simple treasuries. So this is a big change for Brazilian capital markets. As I said before, mainstream conservative investment funds and pension funds will eventually develop develop or enhance their analytical skills. And so that idea of trading complexity for higher returns will fit their bill shortly, I think. In terms of actions to fast track innovation, well, I can tell you, using our experience in the green project, again, we are private equity and structured finance veterans that recently, in the last 4 years, we turned into sustainable finance investors. So different from you guys, our history is much shorter on that. So what I can tell you is what we've been seeing in our short experience in this market. This is a quite expensive journey to do, innovation. We did finance the green project concept and all associated with that for 3 years. No returns, no revenues associated with that. There's only a few other asset managers that I know in Brazil that would be willing to do this. But in our case, we saw the impact of a grant because in mid-2019, we got a grant in support from Convergence Blended Finance. And this was critical to allow us to move until the last mile when we were willing to give up. So thinking about other players that are trying to do innovative things that take time to teach the market how to see those opportunities, how to understand those opportunities. You can't do that without someone willing to help and fund the project preparation. And I think that all of us in working in this sector, we could do a lot more and a lot faster if there was more money being invested in early stage innovation, pilots, and scaling up.
Absolutely. Great. Caroline, my question to you is that Rockefeller has announced financing vehicles, particularly around long-term project finance structures for rural mini-grid development. So can you talk about how these kind of vehicles would enable scalability for the cash-strapped microgrid sector in Africa?
Absolutely, Namita, happy to. Indeed, we have several financing facilities that we have been either investing in or supporting. One specific that I would like to discuss about actually echoes one of the issues referred to earlier with regards to the need for subsidies for the sector. So I'd like to discuss a bit about the Universal Energy Facility. It's a multi-donor, including the Rockefeller Foundation, result-based financing facility that provides incentive payments to eligible organizations, deploying energy solutions and providing verified end-user electricity connections based on predetermined standards. It regroups more than several financiers, as I said, foundation included, but also Shell Foundation, SE for All that many of you know, who have really been thinking, putting their heads together and thinking of how can we provide the market, the mini-grid market, with smart subsidies that can really help get us to scale. So that financing, as I said, has been established to finance mini-grid developers in Africa. It will help them achieve scale and catalyze private investment. Success will be defined by the increase of mini-grids-based electricity connection by those mini-grid developers, offering offering proven technological solutions for rural electrification. The facility will focus on experienced firms and organizations in order to maximize the impact of the funds that will be dispersed by the facility. Right now, we're in the current phase, a pilot phase, that has an initial rollout that we see as an opportunity to really test and improve the design and technical features of this facility. I want to insist on the importance of really the smart IBF, what we call smart IBF, because result-based financing programs have been done before in the sector. This is not, there's nothing new. There's been many initiatives in the past, but very often the feedback from developers was that once the connection were actually done, proven and established, unfortunately getting the payments were taking would take too much time, and therefore the developers would end up themselves cash traps as well. So we really try to bring some efficiency into the process. We think that it's key to ensure that the developers are provided the much needed cash per connection once, as soon as they've been able to prove that they have connected the people in the different areas that we are targeting. So the amount of the subsidy will vary depending on several factors. We've really taken the time to work with the developers, the industry, the financiers, really ensuring that this is a very joint effort by all involved in the mini-grid sector community to ensure that it's a very efficient tool. So this is currently in the pilot phase. We've recently actually launched the rollout phase only about 3 weeks ago, but the hope is that once this is ongoing, the Universal Energy Facility will actually raise to a 500 million USD facility to deliver approximately 2.3 million energy connections and 300,000 clean cooking solutions by 2023. So that's one of the exciting facilities that we're currently working on, and which we think will be key in getting us to scale in the sector. Thank you.
That's indeed very exciting. Thank you so much. So my question to Sonny is that, Sonny, looking at this whole space and, given your experience, most of the discourse of green securitization has been revolving around clean energy and green buildings. While low carbon assets also include smaller agriculture, water, waste, transport. So how would we see more and more financing going into these kind of sectors, and what do you think are some of the low-hanging fruits to enable this kind of an ecosystem? Sonny, you're muted.
Yeah. Okay. So the question I'm hearing is, you've had affordable housing, green affordable housing, etc., and what are the sort of like low-hanging fruits that exist probably within that sort of like green eco space? Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. I think like what we mentioned earlier, which is the sort of like brown to green. I think those are definitely potentials. The only little constraint I see there is obviously the infrastructure for the green, actual vehicles themselves. In terms of, if I look at the MBS market, I mean, we've been able to do, at least I think I've done three series of MBS in this country. The first one was actually in 2007. Quite a while ago. That was the first RMBS done here, but of course with just normal houses, etc. I think obviously a lot of things have to change in terms of the use of materials, etc. To reflect the whole green ecosystem, and those are the kind of things we can begin to encourage developers to look at. The other things one other thing we're currently looking at now, which is new, is actually a blue bond. Which is from again financing of the waters, etc. We've actually received that mandate. There's still a lot of work to do there, and those are the sort of like because again the system here is evolving. Like a colleague from Sun Funds was talking about. I mean, info credit obviously is here to support these sort of transactions. And, you know, although one thing he does need to know is the spread between the AAA borrowing cost and the charges on the guarantee itself can be quite steep. And therefore, the issuer doesn't really enjoy such a drastic drop in cost of funds per se. I think that's worth noting. I think obviously, hopefully, as InfoCredit seasons and goes forward, then hopefully they're able to reduce the cost, and those cost savings can then go to the issuer. But yeah, so there are quite a few. If I look at the securitization space right now, some of the areas we're looking at, for instance, education, okay, which is securitizing school fees. Again, because of the consistency and of those sort of cash flows. You know, transportation we've already talked about, and of course, you know, the other area we're looking at is also rental. As you know, in most of Africa, the bulk of the population actually rent as opposed to own. So one of the areas we're looking at also is securitizing rental cash flows. Exactly, and then, you know, and there are quite a few now. Not necessarily dealing within the green space at this point in time. I think that we would obviously evolve. That's inevitable because that's where the world is going to right now. But at least the good thing is that the fundamentals of buying securitized debt, the fact that investors are beginning to understand the difference between, you know, plain vanilla event risk type corporate bonds vis-a-vis proven cash flow with, you know, levels of credit enhancements and different kinds of credit protections. You know, the rating agencies, as in the domestic rating agencies, also beginning to understand that and distinguishing that. I think that's a right move and a good move forward, you know, for the continent. And I think Nigeria, well, South Africa first. I mean, one of the first securitization I ever worked on in Africa was actually in South Africa for South Africa home loans back in 2001. You know, we closed that in 2001 with Standard Bank in my IFC days. So Nigeria has obviously taken, you know, a lead also in securitization. And I think that as we season going forward, we will begin to see, you know, green assets come on board and being securitized alongside other asset classes.
Okay, that's really very, very interesting. And yes, of course, you know, low cost economy, low carbon economies would have a good developmental impact, and I think that is very, very important. So we have come to the close of our session, and there is since we are already time up, there may be just one question that I can take from the audience, and here there is: how can social entrepreneurs go about aggregating multiple mini projects that attract concessional funding and grants? So anybody who can just very quickly answer that, I would really appreciate. Anybody, any of the speakers?
I would say speak. Sorry, if you wouldn't mind. So it's an entrepreneur with various income streams who wants to securitize it.
Yes.
I think the starting point with all of that is to actually work out: do you actually have somebody in that market who will act as an off-taker, right? So I would sort of spend some time actually working out whether your market has the liquidity and the investors actually available to access that. Sonny, in your experience, I imagine in Nigeria, it's mature markets, that's quite different. But certainly in the markets we operate in, that's not always the case. But having said that, there are actually a fair amount. I mean, climate initiative bonds initiative rather. There are lots and lots of, and I'm happy sort of to share some resources if you want to share our details. There are lots of resources of people that, you know, can actually help with the structuring and so on. There's you know, I think there's a lot of help out there. You just need to know where to find it, and I think people here can actually help and guide people in finding that.
Thank you very much. And I think in conclusion, I would say that small scale assets are expected to create a huge market opportunity for greater levels of low carbon investments, especially in developing countries, and address climate change development very effectively. We've seen and we've heard how benefits are multidimensional, that increase productivity, improve the quality of life, create livelihood opportunities for small scale entrepreneurs. Going forward, all players, including financial institutions, would really need to assume the role of catalysts. I heard one of the speakers say that by investing in these positive impact projects that not only benefit the environment and the society, but also would pave the path towards a very shared kind of a sustainable future for all. I think that is very, very important. And I would like to thank all the speakers, brilliant insights, and thank you very much for sharing this information with the larger audience. And I hope that there's more and more uptake of these kind of financing methods. Thank you very much. So over to you, Justin.
Sure.
Thank you, Namita. Fantastic, fantastic conversation, and very much appreciative of our esteemed panelists, and to you, Namita, fantastic moderation and carrying the conversation through. And so this will be a recorded session. We have a live YouTube session happening against this. So we will have all of these links available on our website in the next day or two. So thank you to everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon or evening, wherever you may be. And to our listeners, thank you for listening in.